Okay, it's live streaming.
All right. So we call the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. and have the flag to do the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Here you go. Ask and you shall receive.
Thank you.
I
Pledge of
pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag
to
of the United States of America
United States of America,
and
and
to the
the
republic
Republic
which
for
is
which it stands,
stands
one nation
one nation,
under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and justice for all.
for all.
All right. And I have a statement on remote participation to read. Consistent with the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, and Regulation 940, CMR 29.10, which allows for remote participation in certain circumstances under the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law regulations. The Mendon-Upton Regional School Committee will be conducting this meeting remotely. In this particular case, all 6 members of the committee are participating remotely and virtually through video conferencing. This is consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 10, 2020, which eased the requirements of having a meeting in a physical space open to the public and having a quorum of the committee physically present. Any and all votes will be conducted by roll call votes. Per usual, this meeting will also be live streamed and recorded. With that, we can move on to the approval of the tonight's agenda. I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second,
We vote by roll call.
John Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desotter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Dorothy Skelly, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye. Motion passes unanimously. Agenda is approved. Next, we need a motion to approve the open session minutes of October 19th, 2020.
Motion to approve open session minutes of October 19th, 2020.
Second,
We vote by roll call.
John Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Phil Desotter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Dorothy Skelly, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye. Motion is approved. So can we approve the 2 executive session minutes together in one motion?
That would be acceptable.
Motion to approve both the executive session minutes from October 5th and October 19th, I believe.
Second,
Vote by roll call.
John Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desotter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Dorothy Skelly, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye. So motion passes unanimously. And next up, we have student comments. Take it away, Owen.
All right. Thank you all so much for having me, speak tonight. It means a lot. So tonight, what I kind of wanted to do was to use my time to talk about how hybrid learning is going at Nipmuc right now. So first off, I just want to say that so far, I feel like overall hybrid learning is pretty successful. And I feel like, the reason that that's the case is because safety protocols are being followed very seriously. So we have arrows in the hallways, which kind of prevents traffic. That way we can make sure that we have 6 feet of distance amongst students. We're making sure that fresh air is getting into the classrooms. We are using a lot of contact tracing to make sure that we're just kind of staying on top of things. Social distancing is taken very seriously, and masks have also been taken very seriously. And altogether, it's made school feel like a pretty safe environment. And I think that that's really crucial because hybrid only works as long as students are able to focus on learning as opposed to making sure that they're in a safe environment. So I just think that that's super, super meaningful, and we're doing a really good job there. Furthermore, remote is going just as well. So, as we of course know, Wednesdays we learn over Zoom. The instruction is, I feel, probably just as meaningful as the instruction we receive in the classroom, which is very helpful, especially for me because the next 2 days are doing work remotely. And then the thing about doing the asynchronous work is that, and this is also just so meaningful. The work that we receive is relevant. It's meaningful work. It's not just work that's designed to keep us busy for the next 2 days. This is work that advances our understanding of the material. It can kind of foster these deeper connections to what we're learning. And I know, just from living in a house with a teacher, that finding work like that to provide your students with, that takes time, that takes energy, that takes planning, and I'm really thankful that our teachers are taking things the extra mile and just working so hard to make sure that we are getting as much out of this year as possible. And then sports are doing just as well with sports. Again, social distancing and mask wearing. There's a huge emphasis on both amongst our sports teams, and that's really that's been crucial to making sure that students district-wide are able to have a season this year, which is great. So I mean, it's worth noting that hybrids also pretty challenging. You have to adapt. You have to work hard to make sure that you are getting the most out of it. But overall, things are going very well right now. And again, I would just like to thank the teachers for taking this the extra mile, and just making sure that we're getting the most out of this year.
Thanks, Owen. Always good to hear your perspective on things.
Thank you.
All right. Next, superintendent's comments.
All right, good evening, everybody. First order of business, and it's actually a piece of good news, and I think I reported this out last school year, which now seems like 7 years ago, but as part of our membership in the Kaleidoscope perspective, one of the pieces that they put before us was not being part of the traditional MCAS science tests, because the ultimate goal is to get away from the traditional MCAS and do something that's a little bit more innovative, something that's a little more hands-on and project-based in manner. So before the pandemic broke in March, we had signed up and been part of a pilot group that DESE plans on going forward with for our grade 5 and grade 8 students to take part in an innovative science assessment, and again, in lieu of the science and technology MCAS test. So it'll basically be a performance task that'll take place probably over a day or two, not a full day, but a couple different sessions where the students will actually work in groups, or at least that's the design, and it would involve kind of interactive simulations. I think, if we're still in the same place in the spring with regard to social distancing, I think it'll be a test that will be in person, but also The simulations will be online, so our students would be able to participate virtually, but also be able to discuss it in small groups. So at this point, we're still receiving more information. At this point, both our school and district leaders, specifically Maureen, have been involved in the kickoff meetings. And based upon the information, we will be sharing that with our science teachers at grades 5 and grade 8 that will be participating in professional development for practices that are aligned to these assessments. Maureen, I don't know if you don't have anything to add to that, do you?
I could just add that it really is a good opportunity for us. Anytime you can be part of assessment design and offering feedback or part of a pilot, you're seeing it in advance. And the benefit of this, all of our teachers, even in other grades like 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 7th, have an opportunity to be part of some of the PD that they're going to be providing. And all of that is aligned to the new type of assessments that we want our students to be engaged in that are more relevant and meaningful to their practice. So it really is a good opportunity for us. And they're just at the beginning of the process of developing the assessments.
Thank you. Second piece that I'd like to share with you as part of my report is our enrollment data. I typically do this each September, usually at that first meeting in September, when the first time that we're seeing kids. It's a little delayed for obvious reasons this year, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a screen share once again, and I'd like to share this and talk about where we are with regard to class sizes and our actual overall enrollment. Let's move something here. So keep in mind, what I'm going to be showing you is our official enrollment. Excuse me. Having difficulty. You guys can all see that, correct? Or is anything in the way? Yes?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay.
Yep.
So these are our official October 1st enrollment numbers. As you can see at Clough, it is, sorry about that, 344 students. At Memorial, we've got, hold on one second, please. I've got an issue on my screen. Okay, that's much better. At Clough, we have 344, Memorial 461, Misco 724, Nipmuc 637, 32 out-of-district students for a total of just under a hair of 2,200, 2,198. So, you know, the thing that we always look at is how does this year's enrollment compare to exactly a year ago? And again, that October 1st is our official number that determines things like our funding, our Chapter 78, and so on. And you can see across the board, particularly at our 2 elementary schools and at Misco, a loss of students. Nipmuc is pretty much exactly where it was, just off by 4. But you can see district-wide, 85 fewer students, which represents about a 4% reduction. We were anticipating, if you guys recall, back in March, when we had that initial open budget hearing, we were anticipating probably a loss in the ballpark of 30 to 40 students, about a 2% loss. But instead, we have about double that. And it turns out there's a few factors which I'll talk about. So again, we always look at how do things break down as far as our town enrollments. We've been in this place for at least the last 5 or 6 years where Proportionally, about 55% of our district students are coming from Upton and 45% are coming from Mendon. And usually we do have a little bit of variability with regard to choice. At this point in the school year, we've got 18 fewer choice students this year than we did last year at this time. And I think the big factor of that is kind of speaks to our 2 elementary schools, but actually all of our schools, because I think of the high degree of uncertainty that we were looking at back in May and in June, and with layoffs and so on. Our principals were very reticent to take choice students. So I think that kind of speaks for a lot of that reduction. Concomitantly, we also have by 5 fewer students that live in Mendon choicing out. Our average class sizes pretty much have maintained status quo. In some places, there are reductions, and one that kind of stands out is our kindergarten. There was roughly a loss of about 20 kindergarten students from Upton. So that's reflected in that kindergarten number. But as you can see, they generally have maintained across the board. And I should note that these average class sizes in reality are a little bit smaller because they take into account the students that are assigned to individual sections, including the students that are in our standalone remote program. They still, even though they're working with different teachers online, they still have their assigned homeroom teachers. So again, MISCO is very, very similar. We generally have lower average homeroom and class sizes in grades 5 and 6, and they tend to be a little bit larger in grades 7 and 8. But we also, in grades 7 and 8, still have those bubble classes that are still in the ballpark of around 200, a little more than 200 students, whereas grades 5 and 6 are kind of carrying this trend of smaller whole classes. You know, you're going from 200 down to in the ballpark of 160 or so. Again, because class sizes, because the enrollment at NIPMUC is pretty much status quo, our average class sizes are also status quo as well. We generally have decent class sizes, and you can see in some of the elective areas. However, business and technology tends to be very, very large just because of the popularity of the program. Again, our final count in the standalone remote program is 187 students. That's kind of a dramatic coming down. You know, when we did our first survey, we were in the ballpark of about 270 back in the summer. And then right before we started, when we did our second survey in September, it went down to about 240. But then when we actually followed up with families, answered questions and so on, we're at 187. That could change. It could go down. It could go up. At this point, we're getting some requests on both sides of the equation to either leave it or to, for some of our students in the hybrid program, for them to participate in the standalone remote program over concerns of the recent spike in the virus. So as you can see, they're relatively small class sizes with one exception, and that one exception being the grade 8 cohort, which is right now 27, which is, you know, that's pretty considerable. That's, you know, 13, 14% of the entire class. And then another big dramatic change, which is also a factor, and I think we talked about this a couple school meetings ago, are the requests that we had come in for homeschool instruction. We've generally been in the ballpark of around 20 every year. As you can see on the bottom of that slide, we had 23 homeschool requests and whose plans were approved by myself. That's jumped up to 47 this year. And of those 47, 29 are brand new homeschool requests. Of those 29, 16 were students that were enrolled in one of our 4 schools last year. Realize also in that 29 are some families that live within our community, but had been sending their students to private schools like Bethany Christian or Whitensville or St. John's. And I think because of the pandemic, they've put in the request for homeschool. So I think the net is, we're maintaining. We have a reduction, a little bit more by a factor of about 2% than what we were anticipating. However, all things considered, I think by and large across the Commonwealth, and from talking to my colleagues, there's been some pretty dramatic reductions in enrollment across the board, for a whole host of different reasons for the challenges that are ongoing and that we're facing. But that's a snapshot of where we are. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Can I ask a question regarding the choice in?
Yeah.
So you indicated that choice in was definitely down from last year.
It's down by 18.
So was the demand there?
Yes.
Okay. So we basically, based on figuring things out and understanding where things are going to go, basically restricted the demand. We did. And particularly at the elementary grades, I think initially because of the uncertainty. If you recall, we have 2 bites at the choice apple per our policy, that we put out how many openings there are by May 15th, and then we revisit it in August. I think the sense of our principals was, again, first in the spring, the uncertainty of where we were going to be with regard to staffing because of the budgetary uncertainty. But then come late summer was the uncertainty around what would in-person instruction look like, and making the decision to really prioritize our kids from Mendon-Upton. Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Move on to new business.
Okay. So this is something kind of interesting. I want to share some ideas, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I'm going to share some ideas, and I'm going to kind of think out loud in the context of presenting some pieces around the next steps. And we've been in hybrid now for 3 weeks. I've gotten not a lot, but a handful of emails, a handful of Facebook messages, and so on, about what are the next steps and what is the plan. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to present some ideas, and again, in the context of just kind of thinking out loud. I'm not doing this in the context of making any recommendations to the committee. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts, some of your ideas, and kind of use it maybe as a foundation in charting a direction moving forward. Okay. Again, I'm going to do a screen share, and let me just get rid of this. And okay, so just kind of where we are today on November 2nd. We've got 3 weeks of the hybrid model underneath our belt, and today was day 13 of meeting with kids in person for in-person instruction. We've just sent out a fairly comprehensive survey to our families, to staff, and to students at the middle school and high school about the hybrid model. And it's comprehensive in the sense that it's asking questions about the asynchronous remote days, the in-person instruction days, about the Wednesdays in the schedule, and so on, to try to capture very much in a parallel manner from students, from staff members, and from parents, their feelings on how this is working so far. So there's really, I would say at this point, there's 3 essential questions that I think we're going to have to face. One, what's the viability, the possibility, and how prudent is it to move toward more in-person instruction? And keep in mind, what we've said through this whole reopening process is, yes, first and foremost, we value the safety, the health, and the well-being of our students and our staff, but we're also recognizing that in-person instruction is really paramount, and it's really what our kids need. So how do we get to that place? Again, if we're going to get to that place, how do we actually plan it? And for which students is it? And how do we prioritize that? And so on. And then the consistent feedback that I get, and I know it's come up in conversation during previous school committee meetings, is, how do we ensure that something consistent is happening during those asynchronous remote days? And how can we improve them to ensure that our kids are really getting the instruction that they need, and there's continuity of instruction, and kids are getting the services that they need? I think there's a lot happening to these days, and I think there's a lot of positive things happening. However, how do we make sure that it's more consistent? So as you all know, is that this is a little bit ironic to talk about, hey, we really, really need more in-person instruction when arguably we're entering the second wave of this virus. And, conceivably over the next 6 to 8 weeks, it's going to get more difficult. And we could be looking at a spike that is dramatically higher than it was in the spring. This is the community map that came out last Thursday evening. And right now, one of our communities, Mendon, is in the red. Upton remains great in the lowest category. However, to be fair and to be honest, because our populations are so small, it doesn't take much to move into the red. And to be very, very honest, based upon some knowledge that I have, I wouldn't be shocked if Upton is in the red, because we're seeing some clusters of families start to test positive. So it's a source of concern. It's not the only metric that we look at, but we're now on this path where literally 1/3, I believe it's 110 communities, roughly 1/3 of the communities across the Commonwealth are in this red high risk category. So keep in mind, that's one piece, but we also track very carefully the data within the district. Right now, we're in a place where we have 5 confirmed infections of either staff members or students. But we're starting to see, kind of commensurate with that uptick, more and more instances of self-quarantining due to either students or staff members having that close contact status. So just think about somebody who has a family member who's tested positive, or they've been in close quarters with somebody who's tested positive. And, by the definition, they've been within 6 feet of them for 15 minutes or more cumulatively in a day when the person was contagious. So we're starting to see that pop up more and more. And I know that our principals are very, very stressed about this for the simple reason that it causes some real problems with coverage. And I can't stress enough, we don't have subs. We are short-staffed with regard to positions like paraprofessionals. We've made some headway in custodial positions, but we're in this place where finding staffing has been extremely challenging. But the flip side of those concerns, and this is something that Governor Baker and our Commissioner of Education, Jeff Riley, has said, and I do agree with this very strongly, that by and large, the safety precautions, the mitigation strategies do work. And there really is no evidence that schools are super spreader venues. And what we've seen in all of our cases, and I know anecdotally from speaking to my colleagues, particularly in neighboring districts, you have situations where infections are coming in from the outside into the school. And, when it's learned, we're generally finding that there hasn't been the spread within the school from somebody who has tested positive or somebody who was a close contact and so on. So our safety and mitigation strategies definitely have been effective. I can also tell you this, despite the uptick in the virus progression, there is considerable pressure and political will to keep our schools open. If you caught the news today, at 1:30 today, Governor Baker announced additional restrictions, including, strengthening the mask mandate now to include all children 5 and older, and putting in a stay-at-home order between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., and including, closing all restaurants and bars at 10 p.m. and so on. But, they've been very, very consistent to say we need to keep our schools open. And that's a message that's being sent loud and clear, I can say, at my level of superintendents. So again, I don't know what the immediate future holds and so on. I do have concerns, however, about should we have additional infections, and again, to use my expression, the cascade of quarantining. Sometimes you will reach a tipping point where you will not have sufficient staff to cover staff members that are, absent plus are at home for a 2-week span quarantining. So it is a source of concern moving forward. So again, all of these pieces, and some of them contradict each other, but again, the paramount piece is doing what we need to do to maintain the health and safety and well-being of our kids and of our staff. That is a non-negotiable. So in kind of talking about the possibilities for more in-person instruction, the piece that always comes up is looking at our youngest learners, specifically looking at early childhood, K through 2, and then specifically returning all of our kindergartners, because as you would imagine, remote learning is extremely challenging with a 5-year-old and essentially is completely dependent on the capacity of our parent and the parent's schedule and what's happening in the household. So we're cognizant that that is just a tremendous challenge. But I want, for the sake of discussion this evening, to talk about what exactly would it take to return our kindergartners full-time and not have, be that first cohort that we would move away from hybrid instruction to full-time instruction. So if we are going to keep in place the 6-foot parameter of physical distancing between the desks, between our students, which I would highly advise that we keep in place, you're going to talk about additional space. And we're talking about probably at our 2 elementary schools, 3 to 4 additional classrooms, which the good news is could be done. It could be available. But I think the problem is the additional staffing that would be required. One of our neighboring districts, Blackstone Millville, has brought back all of their kindergartners, but they're using a model where essentially, say you have a kindergarten classroom of 20 students, they're putting the students in adjacent classrooms because they do have significant physical space in their schools for the simple reason that they've lost a lot of enrollment over the last 5 to 7 years. And essentially what they're doing is they're leaving the door open and they're having a teacher and a paraeducator kind of go back and forth between the 2 classes. Now, I don't think that's the worst model in the world. I don't think it's definitely the best model in the world, but I don't think it could be universally done at Clough and Memorial. So I think you probably would be looking at additional staffing. And again, it is finding appropriately licensed educators, be it paraeducators or teachers, to kind of be an extra set of hands in dealing with this. I don't think it's impossible, but it would involve, reorganizing some physical space and so on. And keep in mind, probably at both elementary schools, you've got 3 or 4 additional classrooms that could be utilized or could be repurposed. I think, again, we talked about this before in moving towards that full in-person model. We still have the transportation issue where, again, we've got the regs from the state that our provider is following, Telstone and Son, which keeps one student to a seat so that we are looking at about 23 maximum students. So I think the transportation piece would be one of 2 things. It would be either changing those regs or we would need a solid parental commitment, and again, part of that micro planning that we've done, within the last couple of months or so to ensuring that we still would have bus capacity, but perhaps more parents driving their students. And then in thinking about, again, going beyond K and keeping that 6 foot of physical distancing parameter in place, I think it becomes a conversation about, repurposing some space, something like, our gymnasium space or our library space, or conceivably, and again, Blackstone Millville has had some success doing this with a boys and girls club would be repurposing some space within the community. And I just, again, I haven't had any conversations with anybody in Upton or so on, but, you know, as an example, something like the Taft Library, could you carve out some classroom space there as well? Obviously, again, in looking at grades, you know, those early childhood grades, you know, you could conceivably also have some staffing implications to bring some additional people on board to work with smaller groups of students. So I come to the second point around what can we do to improve the hybrid model. And again, specifically, I'm thinking about a lot of the work that goes on at the middle school and particularly the high school. And the big concern that I've heard, that I've gotten feedback on, has been around that asynchronous, those 2 asynchronous remote days that we have. And as I said before, ensuring that there's a greater continuity of instruction and supports in place during those 2 days, ensuring that, you know, we're not going to be losing content during those 2 days. And again, thinking about particularly the high school, particularly students that might be accessing things like AP courses and so on. And I know our teachers are really doing a great job to ensure that, you know, not every single class, there's going to be these wholesale reductions in what we can do. So one of the things that is gaining more attention and more popularity is during those asynchronous remote days would be to live stream what is happening in the class. And there are some districts that are doing it with varying degrees of success, varying degrees of sophistication. Next door to us, Hopedale, from grades 4 to 12, the teachers are live streaming their instruction. I also know of a handful of districts here in Rhode Island, one being the district where I was a teacher and also a high school principal, is also live streaming all of their classes. I think, you know, to be very fair, and again, this is the conversation that we've been having since the summertime, there really is no great option that I'm going to say, wow, this is something that's amazing that all kids should have, because, you know, the live stream option, I think it could conceivably be an improvement, but I think it has also some pedagogical limitations and real challenges for folks. And, you know, I've gotten some feedback around the lines of, why can't we just live stream classes? And it's not a simple factor of, hey, I'm just going to take my laptop and turn it in the direction of, you know, the class or where I'm instructing from. It turns out that there's, you know, if you're going to do it and do it right, there's kind of a philosophy behind it, and there's also some technology investments behind it as well. There's a model known as the HiFlex that is starting to get more and more attention. I don't believe it is very, very old, but it's been around probably within the last 3 to 5 years. And it really started at the university level with the mindset that students could access a course both remotely and also in person, and that it would be seamless because of how lessons were designed, and around those 4 principles around choice, equivalency, reusability, and accessibility. Whereas, in a sense, the students that are live in person and the students that are accessing it remotely are kind of getting the same content, and the expectations are the same, and the accessibility is the same. So that's something that districts are that are going down this road of doing live streaming are gravitating toward. And I believe I shared this with you in your background notes, but there's three, and I really want to thank and recognize Dave Quinn for kind of putting this together. But some schools and some districts are kind of doing it organically, which I've referred to here as the Feehan model, where essentially they've installed in their classroom ceiling mounted conference cameras and ceiling mounted Bluetooth mics and speakers. And as you can see in this picture, kind of like a big Dell monitor on a cart. So simultaneously, the instructor and the students are seeing the kids who are zooming in, and they can interact. They've intentionally kind of kept it separate from the smart boards and the iPads and so on, so that those tools are still accessible for instruction. But you kind of see what the cost is. It would probably be, for that type of equipment, in the ballpark of about $1,200 to $1,500 per classroom to equip that. Another model, and actually this is kind of a name brand product, it's known as the OWL, and it's essentially a 360-degree unit that's like a combo mic and camera system that's set up on a tripod. Again, you put, as you can see kind of in that diagram, you would need something like a large screen monitor that would be used to display the students that are at home. I think I have right here just kind of a quick video that kind of shows what this actually looks like in practice. Okay, and then another product that's available that's becoming more and more popular. It's kind of along the same line as the OWL. It is called the Swivel. And the difference is this is pretty automated. It is a robotic system that directly connects to an iPad, and it actually rotates based upon where the noise is coming from in the classroom. So it would actually capture not only the teacher, but also classroom discussion. So, and from the demonstrations that I've seen of it, would work well in our district for the simple reason that you would also be broadcasting everything that's happening in the classroom, but also the students who are zooming in on iPads. So the students would have their iPads in front so that they could still interact with their students that would be dialing in remotely. So again, because this is becoming more and more popular, just like the OWL, the devices are also on back order. The base kit is $1,226. So I bring up these models, and again, I think the challenging piece that we have at this juncture is looking at some of the challenges logistically, but also potentially financially for greater in-person instruction, but then also looking at relatively short term in looking at the hybrid model, how could we enhance those asynchronous remote days? So again, I'm kind of thinking out loud. I don't, at this point, have all of the answers. I do not have this master plan. I do think we'll get better data back from all of our stakeholders as far as what's working, what's not working well. But at this point, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer.
I will jump in. So I think, I mean, some of those options look really cool, but they're also a really big price tag, and some of those are back ordered for 10 to 12 weeks. So you're talking about like January, February, before you could even roll something out. So it's kind of, that's a big expense and we don't know how long we would be using this kind of stuff. So do we know, you mentioned Hopedale, are they using any of those options, or are any sort of districts in the area using any of these sort of more high-priced options now?
Hopedale is using something similar to the Fian model. However, they did it less costly, but the feedback also, which has been problematic, has been they've had issues with regard to audio. So some of the press back has been kids at home appreciate that they're getting some of the live streamed instruction, but they're having difficulties hearing it. So I know some of their investment has been mounted cameras, and then I think they've had a Bluetooth wireless clip-on microphone for the teachers.
So Joe, are we thinking that that there's a higher priority for taking action on one set of kids than another at this point? Or are we thinking that these are all actions worthy of happening at the same time?
I really wrestle with this every single day, and this is the stuff that keeps me up at night. I think when it comes to early childhood, elementary, particularly K through 2, there's only so much that you can get done with those kids online. And again, I think our teachers are exemplary. I think they are doing amazing things with our kids during the remote learning days. But I think the in-person instruction completely trumps what they're doing. And again, looking at the scheme, and again, I'm not saying upper elementary or middle school kids or high school kids don't need in-person instruction and don't need more as well. But I think it comes down to prioritizing what's feasible. And again, the argument around conceivably doing something more with those asynchronous learning days and ensuring that we're progressing in an even way in the curriculum. I know for a fact, and I had a conversation with John and Marianne, I know many of our NIPMUC teachers are really, really working hard to ensure that they're progressing with the curriculum, and it isn't like, okay, I'm going to teach my lessons to cohort 1 on Monday and Tuesday, and then I'm just going to do the same thing with cohort 2 on Thursday and Friday. You do something like that, you're going to end up with approximately 50% of the curriculum being taught. That's absolutely not what we want at any level. So I think it becomes, what are some of the creative solutions?
But that's kind of what's, just so we're clear, that's kind of what's happening today. I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I agree. The teachers are working very hard. And I think the in-person days, students at the high school level, at least from my experience and from what I'm hearing from other parents, is that students are getting essentially all that new content when they're in person, but the asynchronous days are essentially, we'll call it busy work, homework, things like that. And so I think, I come back a little bit, I think, to Sean, and maybe the direction you're leaning, which is kind of where I would be going, which would be, we have different subsets of students that we may be able to try different models with.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think we should look at what we can do to enrich those asynchronous days and make them more relevant, to make the students and the teachers and the pieces of curriculum going more accountable. I think that's an important thing. I think we need to be clear maybe on what we want to achieve at each level. Maybe that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
Because we can put technology and we can build all these different pieces, but some technology works better than others. I mean, what are we really trying to get at?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I was going, Phil. That I think you said it very well. It's almost like, I mean, if we looked very carefully at I'm just going to say, for example, at the high school experience, from what I'm seeing, I think that the AP curriculum, or the AP classes that my daughter's going through, she's actually thankful for the extra time to do the extra work. So the asynchronous days actually are working out because of her specific situation. However, I can imagine very easily falling into a trap where if you're not paying attention to the subject, or you're not clear about what study you're supposed to be achieving, that you can fall into a trap where you're thinking of it more as busy work as a student. Mm-hmm. So I think there's subsets of learning within each school, and we probably should prioritize the neediest students within each school in each different situation. Not to make this even more complex for you, Joe.
Well, yeah, I think that's essential to the discussion, though, is you have to figure out what your fragile student population is at each level. I mean, I agree K-2 is a high priority, but I also worry about, say, our high school students who have special needs and need a lot of transitional services as our juniors and seniors. Yeah. And we can't turn them out into the world as graduated high school students without making sure that we're addressing all of those needs for those students. So I think before we start trying to decide how to improve the models and where to invest the money, we have to figure out what populations need those investments the most. And if
we haven't even talked about middle school here, but
right.
I have a suspicion that middle school, that transitional period, is going to be very complicated to get right. So I think we need some sort of prioritization of the different constituents of students that we've got and what we plan to do for each. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think the big question, and granted, I'm not any expert in it, is about engagement. And I'm not saying that we're talking about necessarily making it be, one group is online and one group is in person and curriculum is constantly being taught. But I think it's about, how do we engage at the different levels, and then what's kind of necessary to help drive and do some of that, because I think that's kind of the point. And I mean, I think some teachers are working on trying to make that happen. And, I don't really know what the best practices are fully there, but, that might be some other thing to look at each different level and understanding what's there. And maybe even to the point, I think, Sean, to what you're saying, there are sub levels within the level. So, you've got, I'm going to say this, but, you have motivated and unmotivated students. You have students that are going to be more engaged in person versus online, and some that are the opposite. You have all those different kinds of subsets and subgroups that are there. And I mean, granted, we're not going to get down to, like, I'll call it the target of one, though we'd like to, how do we kind of start to improve upon that level of engagement that we need with those students in that way?
Well, and
It
how
seems
are
to
we
me those
identifying?
Wednesdays. I'm sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Okay, how are we identifying those students is another concern for me too, because I have a huge concern about sort of the district's child find responsibilities. I think we're missing a lot of kids who are struggling. And when you speak about engagement, Phil, I think that's really important, because if you have students who are struggling with any number of areas, learning, their social, emotional health, and well-being, that engagement piece is not going to happen independently. And what is our responsibility as a district, and how are we gathering that information, and how are we going to provide the appropriate outreach for those students? And I think those are the kinds of kids who are really hurting with the asynchronous learning, which is my huge concern. And I hear all of these options, and I know it's really hard, and there's no right, perfect answer, but I'm really concerned about a lot of our student populations and just the lack of contact for significant chunks of a school week.
Mhm.
I was going to say the Wednesdays, it seems to me that the plan, I don't know whether this was by accident or not, but it seems like those Wednesdays are an opportunity for us to engage with the kids that that may need extra help or may need more engagement. I don't know if that interferes with the time on learning requirements, but it seems like we've got an opportunity to use some of that time during Wednesdays, during the off day and hybrid. I don't know, that's just an idea.
Well, to be fair too, we also do have staff reaching out to kids during the asynchronous days as well. We have ID'd at all levels the kids that might be really, really challenged by the lack of content, or even before the pandemic, we're struggling with a whole host of issues. So I do know for a fact, it's something that is extremely important to us, and our, at the elementary level, for example, our child find teams in conjunction with our principals have developed distinct schedules for reaching out to those kids. I think also as part of the work that's going on at the middle school, where we have para-educators who have the sole function of working with kids that are struggling academically during their 2 asynchronous days. But to your larger point, Carrie, I do think we need to do more work comprehensively around getting that baseline social emotional data, not just for kids that are struggling, but for all of our kids, because I think there are kids in our district that were doing just fine, but this process that what we've been going through over the last 8 months has just put them in a really, really bad place.
Right.
No, I agree. I think I come back to it. I think our number one priority really needs to be on those asynchronous days.
Mhm.
How do we increase the level of engagement? How do we increase I'll call it the content or curriculum and accountability that is there? And I don't mean just, the teachers. I think people are working very hard. I look at that Wednesday as being critical for our teachers and our paras and our people to have time to, one, catch a breath, two, take a look at what's working and what's not, and share amongst each other and try to figure out, how do I go to the next thing? Because I think they're doing a Herculean effort. But I think when it comes to the Thursday and the Friday, maybe there are other ways to kind of deploy how that day works, or even the Monday, Tuesday, those days that are asynchronous for people. How do you structure those so there is time for check-in, there is time for engagement, there is time for those people that are not live, so to speak. And maybe we're leveraging our staff in a slightly different way, from the standpoint of utilizing paras and others in broader ways than maybe we've done in the past. I'm not saying they're not doing a lot of work today, but I'm just saying, can we look at those kinds of things? And I think it'll be different at every level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this comes down to, this is like a 1,000-piece puzzle, right? There isn't like, hey, here's one solution that's going to work. So I do think the feedback around prioritization of students. And again, like you said, Phil, it's not going to get down to the micro level of just one kid at a time. But I think that's our aspiration, that this is really a conversation about equity and not a conversation about equal. And that certain kids are going to need more and certain kids are going to need different than others.
You know, one of the things that's a question in my mind is I'd want to ask all the teachers, where do you stand right now on your timeline for a typical school year? You know, you've obviously now got a semester. Have you got the amount of content done with your kids that you had comparatively in a full school year? You know, for each one of the classes, are you ahead? Are you behind? Do you think you're going to struggle to get all the content into the semester? Now, those are the types of questions I'd be asking.
Yeah, and hopefully that's some of the data that we're going to get back from the initial rounds of surveys. You know, I'm not going to answer for our 170 teachers in the district,
Right?
but my gut tells me they're behind where they typically would be for a whole host of reasons.
Well, I think it comes back to what you said the last meeting, Joe. I mean, I think we all can look at it pretty simply and know that they're behind. I mean, there's only so much to teach in 2 days and even follow up on the asynchronous days that are there. So you only get so much. I did want to come back, I think, to the point, Vicky, you brought up a little bit earlier on some of the technology components. And I'm, you know, I think technology is a support. It's not necessarily the full solution, but I do think we have to look at, you know, what might we do to look at some of the costs of this technology and can we afford it and go in a direction, because we can debate it for a while, but I think we're going to be in this situation for a while. I mean, I'm not seeing anything that says there's any grand change going to come.
I think we have to, all of the superintendents, we had a conference call with Commissioner Riley today, where they're basically, the long and short of it is they're doing an audit of your plan and they want to see how it's working out as far as your time on learning and justifying structure and unstructured learning time for all students. But point blank, he said, look, you know, I think we have to go with the assumption that we're going to be in this type of situation for at least this entire school year, and at a minimum, the start of next school year. So what that actually looks like, I don't know. I know at the, you know, we've talked about, are we looking at migration in and out of different models based upon the progression of the virus? Honestly, I don't know. But I think we've got to do some planning to get the most out of this school year that we possibly can, given all the constraints that we have.
Have we started to at least identify what the cost would be for retrofitting some of the classrooms or going through, taking an approach here? Let's say, you know, we're going to take the fee, you know, kind of your version of the FEAN model and implement it. I'll just use that one to start, but implement it across, let's say, NIPMUC and MISCO and and then we're going to bring in a model at the elementary level. We're going to bring all, I don't know, all, you know, kindergartners back. So that's going to cost a certain amount. I don't know whether we know what those costs would be.
In general terms, in ballpark terms, yes, we have. And, you know, again, it could be, you know, a significant investment. You know, you could be talking, again, easily $150,000, $200,000 investment. But the question is that really money well spent? And, you know, I am optimistic in the sense that I do think that there's some practices that will stay beyond the pandemic that are very, very positive and will be transformational for kids learning. So again, I wouldn't necessarily look at, you know, a significant investment in technology as, oh my God, we're only going to use this for 6 months or 8 months and so on. So I do think there are possibilities even beyond this crisis.
I mean, if you put something like that in place, you'd want to beta test it first. Get it
Yeah.
out there to a couple classrooms. And that might be worthwhile to try to do sooner than later, just to see what our options truly are.
Are there any grants floating around out there for technology at this point for this kind of use that we could tap into?
Mo, Dave? I mean,
I haven't seen any related to technology in at least the grants that I've been looking at. There have been some other ones related to like safe supportive type of grant, you know, different things, but we can look into it as we do.
Yeah, the initial grants from the state was mostly focused on device access versus classroom infrastructure like this. But as Dr. Cohen said, you know, we'll be happy to check the DESE website and see more broadly if there is funding available for what we've described.
But I don't know about what everybody else thinks, but I think we should probably invest in a small investment to try to get some of these technologies in-house to test them right away.
yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I'd be in agreement with that. I think it will just give us a sense also too of, and maybe this is partially what we have to do too. We could try some very different, you know, we can look at some different engagement models on the asynchronous days and, you know, over the next couple of weeks and get some learnings off of, you know, what works, not just the technology, but the technique as well.
Yeah, agreed. That's very good point.
You know, can we use the gym in the Upton Town Hall and have kindergarten in there? You can spread everybody out. I mean, I don't know if we have a space similar to that in Mendon, but, you know, I mean, we'd have to do it after tomorrow, but.
Exactly. But I do think, again, there is a statewide, there is, again, I use the term pressure, but I also use the term political will, that kids need in-person instruction. And I want to be very, very clear. I get that. And I agree with that. I really do. And it's, you know, it almost causes at times a little bit of a cognitive dissonance in the sense that, you know, there's a frustration when you're seeing what's happening with the trend of the virus, and you're saying, why don't we as a society prioritize our schools and hold them sacred? If that really is the most important thing, and instead, you know, we've gotten to the place where we are right now with it spiking. But, you know, on a micro level and looking at our towns, I guess I asked the question, okay, if we as a community and as we as our two towns and as our parent base find that, you know, yes, we need to do everything that we can for in-person instruction, I think, yes, it's a MERS-D problem, but it's also a Mendon-Upton problem. And it may come down to, we're going to have to find some creative spaces, just like what you described, Phil, to make this work.
So, I mean, in addition, we talked a little bit about, like, you know, prioritizing the younger grades and bringing them back. Where are we in terms of bringing back more of our, you know, kiddos on IEPs and who have 504s and maybe need more in-person instruction?
Yeah, we've brought back more of our students who have more intensive needs. We started, as you know, early with the students in the STAR program, but we've brought back more and more students that are in, say, something like intensive ELA reading, mathematics classes that have been in small group classes, particularly, and we've really prioritized middle school for that. So those kiddos are 4 days a week.
So the survey, I think the survey just went out literally like last hour, right? Mm-hmm. So with that information, I think that survey is going to run until when again?
We're going to run it for a week because my expectation is 2 weeks from tonight, I want to kind of summarize everything and share those results with you, and also share them with the community.
Yeah, I mean, I'll encourage people to put their learning experiences down, because I think without that, we're not going to be able to get the information we need to make sure we're not dealing just on anecdotal information,
Yeah.
which will be important. But then from there, I think with that insight, we should be able to look almost at a grade by grade level and start to understand what's working, what's not working, because as kids go up in grades, or, they have very different needs. But then we can look at, what are those actionable plans necessary at each grade level almost.
Yep.
within
And
the
you can
report.
see it's a pretty comprehensive survey. We'll be able to disaggregate the data, like you said, by school, by grade level, and there are plenty of comment boxes. So people can definitely put their viewpoints in.
I want to reflect one of the comments that was made by the people viewing. There's a great comment on there around exchanging information between the teachers. I hope that we're doing that on a regular basis, because that's been proven, at least in the professional world, for improving productivity by very large bounds.
Things that are working and strategies and
right,
and so on. Yeah.
Any problems that individuals are having, and trying to get feedback from their peers.
Yeah, and as you alluded to before, Sean, that's really the value of having that Wednesday afternoon.
So just one sort of looking forward in terms of, I know we kind of discussed a lot about improving hybrid, but, as we are looking at rising numbers and sort of the infections coming from the outside, and we have Thanksgiving looming, and we have new sort of travel restrictions for neighboring states. Can we just talk a little bit about what, I see some people talking about, schools at the secondary level emulating what colleges are doing in terms of shutting down after Thanksgiving, and what's that going to look like for families who might be traveling to, say, Connecticut and New York, or not New York, New Jersey, but you know what I mean? The area now has expanded in terms of a quarantine. So if a kid's traveling or his teacher is traveling and they come back, how's that going to impact staffing? What do people need to be aware of, just so we can refresh kind of, are people, if people are quarantining, kids are coming back and they're quarantining for 2 weeks, or staff is?
So great questions. I'm going to try really hard to answer those, Vicki, without editorializing. I might have to bite my tongue. It's kind of interesting. About a week, 2 weeks ago, we got an email from the Commissioner of Education that said, hey, I'm starting to hear rumors that there's some school committees and superintendents that are starting to consider following the route of a lot of the colleges are doing, and going full remote right after Thanksgiving, and keeping remote until January 1st, just to see what happens. Oh, by the way, if you do this, we will put your district under audit. And I can tell you, nobody's going to go down that road now. And there were actually two neighboring districts that were toying with the idea of doing that. So that's not going to be a possibility, but I think it comes down to, and you're kind of alluding to it in the question, that in order for us to be in a good place as a district, I think there's going to have to be sacrifice for the greater good. To be really frank with you, I've got real grave concerns about the next 2 weeks. I know for a fact in this community, in both of our communities, there were kids trick-or-treating, there were, and kind of not going against guidelines and not physically distancing. There were Halloween parties being held, And we received a handful of calls and, middle school, elementary level, where parents were actually keeping their kids out for these 2 weeks for the simple reason of things that they saw going on in the community for Halloween. So I think with the holidays coming up, it's the same thing. Yes, to your point, I think, we can send out reminders that if you're going to visit family in Virginia or wherever, upon coming back, you're going to have to quarantine, and we can put provisions in place for remote learning for those kids when they come back. But again, I think this is a conversation about shared sacrifice and doing things for the greater good of our community and the greater good of our district, so that, again, I don't see myself being in this place where, we have to pull up everything and say, okay, until X point, we're going to be full remote. I don't think anybody wants that. But I have grave concerns, again, around one morning, me having to do a robocall to say, okay, Misco is closed or Misco is full remote today for the simple reason that, we've got X number of teachers in quarantine and X number of kids in quarantine. So it's a difficult situation. I mean, I think we can consistently get the message out there, but again, it comes down to shared responsibility.
Joe, I don't know if anybody else got this, but I got a public service announcement on my phone this evening for about Milford being 3 weeks in the red. So
Yeah.
they're going to have to go backwards, in their quarantine status.
Well, I'm very close with the superintendent, and we had a conversation last week, and I think it's in it is in the realm of possibility of them going full remote. However, again, for what it's worth, again, because of that political will and that political pressure, I wouldn't be shocked if DESE now is going to come up with modified guidelines around making a decision. Again, you guys got the memo. I forwarded it to you about 3 consecutive weeks. Please use that before making any type of decision. Again, I can see them making alterations to that recommendation. Very, very challenging.
So Joe, what is the metric right now for taking a step back? Like, what would have to happen for us to fall back to full remote?
So the guidelines would be, just like Sean said, do you have 3 consecutive weeks where you're in red? We've been given guidance saying, well, but, do you want to look at context? For example, there's certain communities like Framingham. Well, do you have a university like Framingham State University is there, and there's a lot of student cases. Do you have a nursing home? Believe it or not, one of the largest nursing homes in Massachusetts is in my hometown of Agawam. Surprise, surprise, Agawam's been in the red for quite some time. So, you have that metric, but they're saying take a look at the deeper context. Now, to be fair, in our communities, because it's such a small population, you can have literally 2 families or 3 families where everybody in the family gets it and they drive the rating. I can tell you, Mendon went into the red because of 8 cases over 2 weeks. So it doesn't take much. So I think you've got to look at, yes, the state ranking, the state codings, color codings are important, but then I think you also, Carrie, have to look at the context of what's happening in your schools. How many people are going into quarantine? Again, our staff by and large does not live in Mendon or Upton. So they're bringing in other things into the building and so on. So I wish it was just one really simple rubric that, we could kind of look it up and that's what it tells us. I think it's a more complex decision.
Right, but I asked the question because I'm starting to see that school districts are starting to put those out. Like if you go to DESE's website and you look at their criteria, and they're encouraging us to, like, you almost have to prove that the spread is happening at the school in order for you to take the step back. And then the approval needs to happen through DESE after the school committees and the boards of health meet. I mean, the process sounds really complicated, but I'm starting to see on some community school web pages, they're starting to put those decision trees out there for the community to take a look at. So I was just curious as to if we put any thought into doing something like that.
Yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense than saying, hey, we're going to take a look at this very holistically, but we are looking at it holistically. And again, after 3 weeks of experience, as I reported, we have a grand total of 5 infections, but to be very frank, we're waiting on more of people who literally are part of our district that are waiting on tests right now. So that could grow. But the good news is, of the situations that we've had, and again, I think I've put out a couple emails to everybody in the community because I think transparency in this is super important. We had one situation where it literally is a family, and the family acted really, really responsibly. And as a result, there never was any close contacts. We had another situation where the individual was contagious, and there were close contacts that needed to quarantine, but there was no infection. So again, that kind of speaks to the good safety measures that have been in place that really are being effective. So again, I do think that there is validity to the claim that, schools as they're set up are not super spreader factories, which is good news, but it still doesn't ameliorate the concern that, the rates are going up. So therefore our students and our staff are still susceptible. And, you work in a school and and I'm sure you probably have had an instance in your school, and how people react, and your mind kind of goes to a bad place of like, oh my God, am I a close contact? And oh my God, what about my kids? Or what about, my 80-year-old mom at home? And and I see her in the Zoom room. Leslie McGinnis has become like my personal therapist over the last 2 months or so, in the sense that, her and Trish Parent work through this very logically and very rationally. And you've got to think about, okay, what's the definition of a close contact? What would be a secondary contact? What would be a tertiary contact, and so on. But again, it's very, very challenging work.
Any other comments or questions to the committee about hybrid model next steps? So we have a revision to the calendar.
Yeah, what you have before you is just a simple revision. I believe I alluded to this because we got the later start of the school year. We were slated to have our 2 parent-teacher conferences next week prior to the Veterans Day holiday. What I'm recommending in working with both our leadership team, but also putting out a survey, what works best is to change those parent-teacher conferences to from November 9th and 10th to December 8th and 9th. And as it typically is, it'll be 2 half days and an evening for events. And as we've stated before, all of these conferences will be held virtually through Zoom. So
And
seeing
that's intended to be a Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Monday, Tuesday?
I believe it's a Tuesday, Wednesday, the 8th and the 9th.
Okay. So it's the days, 2 half days, but then in the evening as well as the half day?
In the interim, yes, on Tuesday.
Okay.
So being that this is a calendar change by our district policy, you should vote to amend the calendar to include those 2 parent teacher conference days.
Motion to amend the calendar to include the conference days on December 8th and 9th instead of November 9th and 10th.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, I.
Bill DeZetter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, I.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye. Motion passes unanimously. So, right, moving on to community comments. I'm going to read through the comments here from Alicia Basoli. Has there been discussion about widening the group of students on IEPs and 504s who need extra support being welcomed back for more in person? You touched on this a little bit. I don't know if you can, if there's any more to add to that.
No, but I think it's an ongoing conversation. And again, around what we talked about earlier, as far as prioritization of needs, and then, you know, having those kids come back.
A few comments from Beth Ann Tech talking about prioritizing K through 3 in addition to students with special needs, also saying middle school doing a great job with the transition. So comment from a parent of a kindergarten student that this is difficult with the work schedule Wednesday through Thursday. Question about being on track. These are more comments than questions, but comment that about covering the curriculum. And there's a question, is there any thought to extending the school to accommodate a full year of learning, or at least the 10 days from grades 1 up? And how about the month lost for kindergarten?
You know, anything is possible, but it would have very, very severe, intense financial implications with all of our associations to extend the work year.
Sorry, I'm just trying to read through for the comment about in terms of streaming into the live classroom, that this would be challenging at the elementary level, but I think you were, correct me if I'm wrong, that was more geared toward middle school and high school students.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where the priority would be.
So someone asking about you know, the space and headcount issue, like if we had the staffing, would be ready to turn the key on this? And this is in terms of full in person at the younger grades.
I think it would take some planning, and there would definitely be some logistics planning that would have to be involved. Could I say, hey, we can start this next week? No. But, you know, I think, again, looking at the kindergarten piece, that might be one of the easier ones to tackle. I think the grades beyond that would be a little on the thorny side.
And there's a question about like if parents are keeping kids home from school because they're uncomfortable, you know, with say like Halloween parties, or perhaps, you know, as we come upon the holidays, where like people are not wearing masks or not social distancing. What is that just considered an absence, or
You guys are there, right? It's not me, it's Vicky.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's totally frozen.
Yep. Oh,
I'm sorry, you're
back.
back. You totally froze there. Yeah.
Sorry, you lost me. I thought I think, very frozen there. All right. So the question was about if a parent is keeping their child home voluntarily because they felt like maybe things were going on, like for example, you mentioned Halloween parties. Is that just considered an absence, or what's the response to that?
Yeah, it would be considered an absence, but then we would also make a notation, in working with them to try to provide as much remote instruction as possible.
Okay. And then there's a question about, is it possible to do full day Zoom on Wednesday or at least every other week to add more learning opportunities?
Well, we have an agreement with our associations, and at this point in time, we have to maintain and honor that agreement. And again, the point of I understand where that comment is coming from, but I can't underscore that our teachers and all of our educators really need that time on Wednesday. Some of the planning and, this is extraordinary circumstances for them. And I think it's really important to underscore the stress that they're under in trying to make all this work. And that additional planning time is really crucial.
And one last question about the timing of some of those decisions based on the results of the survey, and like what that will look like.
I think we will have the survey results based upon some of the direction that you gave me around prioritization and looking at potentially piloting some things for asynchronous days and particularly around engagement. I think we'll have something a little bit more formative in 2 weeks, but I don't see it as necessarily a finalized plan. But, we'll get there.
All right. So with that, I think we'll move on to correspondence. Is there any?
We have none.
And then other matters not instituted by the committee within 48 hours of the posted meeting. Appear to be none. Future agenda items will be the survey results on the hybrid model and standalone remote on November 16th. And that, taken motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye. We're adjourned at 8:40 p.m.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.